Hey guys. Um, so we are reading chapters 25 to 29 today. That's 49 to 56, I believe. Callie's back, even though she hates reading. Um, Hopefully that changes by the end. Okay. She's also why I've been delayed making these videos because she takes up most of my morning. All right, let's get started. Chapter 26. There are no telephones, but word spread quickly through the small town. By the end of the day, everyone in Green Lake had heard the schoolteacher had kissed the onion picker. Not one child had shown up for school the next morning. Miss Catherine sat alone in the classroom and wondered if she'd lost track of the day of the week. Perhaps it was Saturday. It wouldn't have surprised her. Her brain and heart had been spinning ever since Sam kissed her. She heard a noise outside the door, then suddenly a mob of men and women came in, storming into the school building. They were led by Trout Walker. "There she is!" Trout shouted. "The devil woman!" The mob was turning over desks and ripping down bulletin boards. "She's been poisoning your children's brains with books," Trout declared. They began piling all the books in the center of the room. "Think about what you're doing," cried Miss Catherine. Someone made a grab for her, tearing her dress, but she managed to get out of the building and she ran to the sheriff's office. The sheriff had his feet up on his desk and was drinking from a bottle of whiskey. "Morning, Miss Catherine," he said. "They're destroying the schoolhouse," she said, gasping for breath. "They'll burn it to the ground if somebody doesn't stop them." "Just calm your pretty self down a second," the sheriff said in a slow drawl, "and tell me what you're talking about." He got up from his desk and walked over to her. "Trout Walker has—" "Now don't go saying nothing bad about Charles Walker," said the sheriff. "We don't have much time," urged Catherine. "We've got to stop them." "I know, I'm mad too. Come over here." "You got to stop them. You're sure pretty," said the sheriff. Hey. "You're sure pretty, Miss Catherine," said the sheriff. Miss Catherine stared at him in horror. "Kiss me," said the sheriff. She slapped him across the face. He laughed. "You kissed the onion picker. Why won't you kiss me?" She tried to slap him again, but he caught her by the hand. She tried to wiggle free. "You're drunk," she yelled. "I always get drunk before a hanging." "A hanging? Who?" "It's against the law for a Negro to kiss a white woman." "Well, then you'll have to hang me too," said Catherine, "because I kissed him back." "It ain't against the law for you to kiss him," the sheriff explained, "just for him to kiss you." "We're all equal under the eyes of God," she declared. The sheriff laughed. "Then if Sam and I are equal, why won't you kiss me?" He laughed again. "I'll make you a deal. One sweet kiss, and I won't hang your boyfriend. I'll just run him out of town." Miss Catherine jerked her hand free. As she hurried to the door, she heard the sheriff said, "The law will punish Sam, and God will punish you." She stepped back into the street and saw smoke rising from the schoolhouse. She ran down to the lakefront where Sam was hitching Mary Lou to the onion cart. "Thank God I found you," she sighed, hugging him. "We've got to get out of here, now." "What?" "Someone must have seen us kissing yesterday. They set fire to the schoolhouse. The sheriff said he's going to hang you." Sam hesitated for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He didn't want to believe it. "Come on, Mary Lou. We have to leave Mary Lou behind," said Catherine. Sam stared at her for a moment. There were tears in his eyes. "Okay." Sam's boat was in the water. She tied to a tree by a long rope. He untied it, and they waded through the water and climbed aboard. His powerful arms rowed them away from shore, but his powerful arms were no match for Trout Walker's motorized boat. They got little more than halfway across the lake when Miss Catherine heard the loud roar of the engine. Then she saw the ugly black smoke. These are the facts. The Walker boat smashed into Sam's boat. Sam was shot and killed in the water. Catherine Barlow was rescued against her wishes. When they returned to shore, she saw Mary Lou's body lying on the ground. The donkey had been shot in the head. That all happened 110 years ago. Since then, not one drop of rain has fallen on Green Lake. You make the decision. Whom did God punish? 3 days after Sam's death, Miss Catherine shot the sheriff while he was sitting in his chair drinking a cup of coffee. Then she carefully applied a fresh coat of red lipstick and gave him the kiss he had asked for. For the next 20 years, Kissing Kate Barlow was one of the most feared outlaws in all the West. Stanley dug his shovel into the ground. His hole was about 3.5 feet deep in the center. He grunted and pried up some dirt and flung it off to the side. The sun was almost directly overhead. He glanced at his canteen lying beside his hole. He knew it was half full, but he didn't take a drink. He had to drink sparingly, because he didn't know who would be driving the water truck next time it came. 1 second. Hey, what are you chewing? Oh. Just chew this. Chew this. Right. 3 days had passed since the warden scratched Mr. Sir. Every time Mr. Sir delivered water, he poured Stanley's straight onto the ground. Fortunately, Mr. Pendanski took water. Here, you take her. Fortunately, she's awful. Fortunately, Mr. Pendanski delivered water more often than Mr. Sir. Mr. Pendanski was obviously aware of what Mr. Sir was doing, because he always gave Stanley a little extra. He'd fill Stanley's canteen and then let Stanley take a long drink, then top it off for him. It helped, too, that Zero was digging some of Stanley's hole. Although, as Stanley had expected, the other boys didn't like to see Stanley sitting while they were working. They'd say things like, "Who died and made you king?" Or, "It must be nice to have your own personal slave." When he tried to pointing out that he was the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds, the other boys said it was his fault because he was the one who spilled them. "I risked my life for those seeds," Magnan said, "and all I got was one lousy handful." Stanley had also tried to explain that he needed to save his energy so he could teach Zero how to read, but the other boys just mocked him. "Same old story, ain't it, Armpit?" X-Ray had said. "The white boy sits around while the black boy does all the work. Ain't that right, caveman?" "No, that's not right," Stanley replied. "No, it ain't right," X-Ray agreed. "It ain't right at all." Stanley dug out another shovelful of dirt. He knew X-Ray would have talked like that if he was the one teaching Zero to read. Then X-Ray would be talking about how important it was he got his rest, right? So he could be a better teacher, right? And that was true. He did need to save his strength so he could be a better teacher. Although Zero was a quick learner, sometimes, in fact, Stanley hoped the warden was watching them with her secret cameras and microphones so she'd know Zero wasn't as stupid as everyone thought. From across the lake, you could see the approaching dust cloud. He took a drink from his canteen, then waited to see who was driving the truck. The swelling on Mr. Sir's face had gone down, but it was still a little puffy. There had been 3 scratch marks down his left cheek. 2 of the marks had faded, but the middle scratch must have been the deepest because it still remained. It was a jagged purple line running below his eye to below his mouth, like a tattoo of a scar. Stanley waited in line, then handed him his canteen. Mr. Sir held it up to his ear and shook it. He smelled at the swishing sound. Stanley hoped he wouldn't dump it out. To his surprise, Mr. Sir held the canteen under the stream of water, then filled it. "Wait here," he said. Still holding Stanley's canteen, Mr. Sir walked past them, then around the side of the truck and into the cab where he couldn't be seen. "What's he doing in there?" asked Zero. "I wish I knew," said Stanley. A short while later, Mr. Sir came back out of the truck and handed Stanley his canteen. It was still full. "Thank you, Mr. Sir." Mr. Sir smiled at him. "What were you waiting for?" he asked. "Drink up." He popped some sunflower seeds into his mouth, chewed and spit out the shells. Stanley was afraid to drink it. He hated to think of what kind of vile substance Mr. Sir might have put in it. He brought the canteen back to his hole. For a long time he left it beside his hole and continued to dig. Then, when he was so thirsty he could hardly stand it anymore, he unscrewed the cap, turned the canteen over, and poured all of it onto the dirt. He was afraid if he waited another second, he might have taken a drink. After Stanley taught Zero the final 6 letters of the alphabet, he taught him his own name, capital Z-E-R-O. Zero wrote the letters as Stanley said them. "Zero," he said, looking at his piece of paper. He smiled. His smile was too big for his face. Stanley watched him write over and over again. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. In a way, it made him sad. He couldn't help but think that 100 times 0 was still nothing. "You know, that's not my real name," Zero said as they headed back to the rec room for dinner. "Well, yeah," Stanley said. "I guess I knew that." He'd never really been sure. "Everyone's always called me Zero, even before I came here." "Oh, okay. My real name's Hector." "Hector," Stanley repeated. "Hector Zeroni." After 20 years, Kate Barlow returned to Camp Green Lake. It was a place that nobody would ever find her, a ghost town on a ghost lake. The peaches trees had all died, but there were a couple of small oaks still growing by an old abandoned cabin. The cabin used to be on the eastern shore of the lake. Now the edge of the lake was over 5 miles away, and there was little more than a small pond full of, and it was little more than a small pond full of dirty water. She lived in the cabin. Sometimes she could hear Sam's voice echoing across the emptiness. Onions, sweet, fresh onions. She knew she was crazy. She knew she had been crazy for the last 20 years. Oh, Sam, she would say, speaking into the vast emptiness. I know it is hot, but I feel so very cold. My hands are cold, my feet are cold, my face is cold, my heart is cold. Sometimes she would hear him say, I can fix that, and she'd feel his warm arm across her shoulders. She had been living in the cabin for about 3 months when she was awakened one morning by someone kicking open the cabin door. She opened her eyes to see the blurry end of her rifle 2 inches from her nose. She could smell Trout Walker's dirty feet. You've got exactly 10 seconds to tell me where you hid all your loot, said Trout, or else I'll blow your head off. She yawned. A red-headed woman was there with Trout. Kate could see her rummaging through the cabin, jumping drawers and knocking things from shelves of the cabinets. The woman came to her. Where is it? She demanded. Linda Miller, asked Kate. Is that you? Linda Miller had been in 4th grade when Kate Barlow was still a teacher. She had been a cute, freckled-faced girl with beautiful red hair. Now her face was blotchy and her hair was dirty and scraggly. It's Linda Walker now, said Trout. Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry, said Kate. Trout jabbed her by the throat with the rifle. Where's the loot? There is no loot. Don't give me that, shouted Trout. You robbed every bank from here to Houston. You better tell him, said Linda. We're desperate. You married him for his money, didn't you? Asked Kate. Linda nodded. But it's all gone. Dried up with the lake, the peach trees, the livestock. I kept thinking it has to rain soon. The drought can't last forever, but it's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Her eyes fixed on the shovel, which was leaning against the fireplace. She's buried it, she declared. I don't know what you're talking about, said Kate. There was a loud blast as Trout fired his rifle above her head. The window behind her shattered. Where is it buried? He demanded. Go ahead and kill me, Trout, said Kate. But I sure hope you like to dig, because you're going to be digging for a long time. It's a big, vast wasteland out there. You and your children and their children can dig for the next 100 years. You'll never find it. Linda grabbed Kate's hair and jerked her head back. Oh, we're not going to kill you, she said. But by the time we're finished with you, you're going to wish you were dead. I've been wishing I was dead for the last 20 years, said Kate. They dragged her out of bed and pushed her outside. She wore blue silk pajamas. Her turquoise-studded boots remained beside her bed. They loosely tied her legs together so she could walk, but she couldn't run. They made her walk barefoot on the hot ground. They wouldn't let her stop walking. Not until you take us to the loot, said Trout. Linda hit Kate on the back of her legs with a shovel. You're going to take it to us sooner or later, so you might as well make it sooner. She walked one way and then another, and then until her feet were black and blistered. Whenever she stopped, Linda whacked her with the shovel. I'm losing my patience, warned Trout. She got up and felt the shovel jab into her back and fell hard onto the dirt. Get up, ordered Linda. Kate struggled to her feet. We're being easy on you today, said Trout. It's going to keep getting worse and worse until you take us to it. Look out, shouted Linda. A lizard leapt toward them. Kate could see its big red eyes. Linda tried to hit it with a shovel and Trout shot at it, but they both missed. The lizard landed on Kate's bare ankle. Its sharp black teeth bit into her leg. Its white tongue lapped up the droplets of blood that leaked out on the wound. Kate smiled. There was nothing they could do to her anymore. Start digging, she said. Where is it? Linda screeched. Where did you bury it? Trout demanded. Kate Barlow died laughing. Part 2, The Last Hole, Chapter 29, last chapter of the day. There was a change in the weather, for the worse. The air became unbearably humid. Stanley was drenched in sweat. Beads of moisture ran down the handle of the shovel. It was almost as if the temperature had gotten so hot that the air itself was sweating. A loud boom of thunder echoed across the empty lake. The storm was way off to the west, beyond the mountains. Stanley could count more than 30 seconds between the flash of lightning and clap of thunder. That was how far away the storm was. Sound travels a great distance across a barren wasteland. Usually, Stanley could only see mountains at this time of day. The only time they were visible at sunup, before the air became hazy, but now the sky was very dark off to the rest, and every time the lightning flashed, the dark shape of the mountains would briefly appear. "Come on, rain," shouted Armpit. "Blow this way." "Maybe it'll rain so hard it'll fill up the whole lake," said Squid. "We can go swimming." 40 days and 40 nights, said X-Ray. "Guess we better start building us an ark. Guess 2 of each animal, right?" "Right," said Zigzag. 2 rattlesnakes, 2 scorpions, 2 yellow spotted lizards. The humidity, or maybe the electricity in the air, had made Zigzag's head even more wild-looking. His frizzy blonde hair stuck almost straight out. The horizon lit up with a huge web of lightning. In that split second, Stanley thought he saw an unusual rock formation on top of one of the mountain peaks. The peak looked exactly to him like a giant fish, with a thumb sticking straight up. Then it was gone. Stanley wasn't sure whether he'd seen it or not. "I found refuge on God's thumb." That was what his grandfather had supposedly said after Kate Barlow had robbed him and stranded him in the desert. No one ever knew what he meant by that. He was delirious when he said it. But how could he live for 3 weeks without food or water? Stanley had asked his father. "I don't know. I wasn't there," replied his father. "I wasn't born yet. My father wasn't born yet. My grandmother, your great-grandmother, was a nurse in the hospitals where they treated him. He'd always talk about how she dabbed his forehead with cool wet cloth, and he said that's why he fell in love with her. He thought she was an angel. A real angel?" His father didn't know. "What about after he got better? Did he ever say what he meant by God's thumb or how he survived?" "No, he just blamed his no-good, pig-stealing father." The storm moved off farther west, along with any hope of rain. But the image of the fist remained in Stanley's head. Although, instead of lightning flashing behind the thumb, in Stanley's mind, the lightning was coming out of the thumb, as if it were the thumb of God. Alright, so that's it for today. We're stopping at chapter 30. Callie got fired again. Alright, see you tomorrow.